Let's talk a little bit about how to draw on your computer. And I don't mean take a marker and start drawing on your computer, but to how to use apps that are available on different platforms. And there are quite a few out there. There are a few that I think kind of float to the top as far as their capabilities and what we might find useful. One is Morpholio. Look at all these people that recommend Morpholio. Very architectural, a lot of really interesting features that these all share. Most of these applications can use or do use a stylus. They allow you to draw using guides. They have layers that you can turn on and off, and they have different styles of pen. So this one you can see some are more sketchy, and some are less sketchy, and you can fill in areas of your drawings. Another one is called Concepts. I think this is probably a little more stylistic. This is also a nice one if you are really good at Adobe Illustrator. You can export the file format that this one produces to Illustrator as a vector, which is awfully nice. We'll learn more about vectors when we talk about Illustrator. Those of you that have laptops that are the style laptops that are tablets that can use a stylus either on their own or and in addition, touchscreen type of apps, you might look at one of these web-based editors. The one that I think is the best is Pixlr Editor, Pixlr. And this one you can draw. I'm just using my mouse here. I don't have a stylus handy. Because I'm just drawing on my desktop. But this is one that is awfully nice, and it has a number of different types of line options, and it's very artistic. But you can also import photos. Again, most of these allow you to do that. But this one you're on a more powerful machine than, say, just your phone. And actually, if you are using a Mac and you want to use something like Pixlr Editor, you can use a special product called InkLit, which allows you to use your touchpad as a drawing device with a not an Apple Pen, but just a regular stylus. Fun. It does cost a little bit, but you can try it out if you want. Anyway, the one that I'm going to use is called SketchBook from our friends at Autodesk. Yes, that's right. The people who give us Revit and AutoCAD. They've done it again. They've given us a nice drawing app. Actually, what's really nice about it is this one, because you're a student, you can get it for free. The other apps all cost either a monthly or an annual fee, and that can be upwards of $20 or $30. Not that that's a huge amount when you're running an office, but when you're a student, it's a fair amount. Also, what I like about this app is that it runs on various devices, including your laptop computers. So obviously it's more fun to draw using a stylus, but if you want a little more power, you can use it. This individual subscription, by the way, is not necessary. Follow the link to the Autodesk student community website, educational community, and you can get this app for free, and a fully featured app. So, and just taking a look at it quickly here on my desktop, again, I'm going to jump to my iPad version momentarily, but just to show you, again, the features that most of these programs have, they have different kinds of pens that you can click on. I'll click on this and you'll see that there are all sorts of different pens. Some look like spray bottles, some look like markers, some look like an inking pen, and yes, it actually does say that. And they have hard and soft erasers. There's all sorts of interesting stuff. There are layers, and these layers, interestingly enough, are very similar to the layers that you'd see in Photoshop, where they have a number of features, including how opaque they are, but also their blending modes. You can add them, subtract them, and you can move them around in your list here. Then you have the ability to fill using colors. Again, I'm using my desktop to demonstrate this initially because the menus are nice and big. And anyway, and then there are all these other shapes that you can draw. One nice thing that this desktop app has that the others do not have is a perspective grid that allows you to draw lines that are going to vanishing points. In case you wanted to, say, draw an interior, but you don't actually have a space drawn, you can take advantage of these this perspective grid. So anyway, other than that, it does have these nice guide features which allow you to draw lines that are, say, parallel to each other just by moving the guide along, or by drawing a protractor and reshaping your protractor and drawing different lines that are curved that are also parallel to each other. And again, the others are probably fairly self-explanatory. Again, most of these, pretty much all of these, are going to have some sort of text option. There you go. And the text can be moved around and rotated, and you can even manipulate it and warp it and fun things like that. Except I don't have it selected. You can also use fill patterns to dump into objects. You can crop your view and all this sort of stuff. So anyway, these also, by the way, because the desktop app has all the full buttons, but it also has these kind of micro buttons down here. These allow you to quickly access some of the same features that are up here. Which type of brush do you want to use? Well, I could use the whole brushes palette. Some people prefer to have a minimal menu. What will happen when we switch to the iPad is that you'll see that they tend to focus on the smaller menus because you have a smaller screen. So here's the iPad interface. I'm going to make a new sketch here. I'm just going to use the screen resolution. I believe that's the maximum size of the iPad. And click Create, and it gives you a nice blank sheet. Yes, I'm discarding my current sketch. And what you'll see that the pencils are here on the left. You can just click on the color to see the color options, and then click on the pencil itself to start drawing. I'm using a stylus here to just kind of draw a random pattern. And there are all sorts of features about brushes, including basic features, which just have the general size, and opacity. But if you go with the more advanced features, this is great, especially if you're working on a tablet or with an iPad with an Apple Pencil. Apple Pen, you can actually control the pressure sensitivity. You can really get some nice lines with that. Anyway, all of you have your favorite drawing tools, so I would strongly encourage you to find one that you like. Pencils obviously are an awful lot of fun, but so is the spray can, or the flow airbrush, excuse me. Like the others, it has different options, and sometimes it's nice just to create a little shadow background in your drawings. So there are so many different pens that you can use that, and there's so many options that, again, I would go with what style you prefer. Sometimes I like to experiment with having kind of a blushy sort of background. I can draw it on the main layer that I was drawing the other objects on, or if you see here, I can create a new layer and put that blush kind of effect on that layer. And that's really nice if you want to, say, control the opacity of that layer or the color independently. So what I'm doing here, I can change the bottommost layer is a layer that is the color, background color layer. So I'm turning it, toggling it on and off by... So what I can do here, using the paint bucket, I can pick some colors, pick a color, and then just tap in areas that are completely bounded. In other words, there's a boundary around those areas, and see how they fill in. I can also create a blank layer, and I can paint over that entire layer, or I can drag that layer underneath the first layers, and you see how the objects show up on top of that background layer. So there's any number of ways that you can paint objects. Sometimes I'll paint just using a background layer. Sometimes I'll use painting. So what you see here is a guide that is built into the system, and it's basically a ruler, and I can drag the ruler with one finger. I can actually rotate the canvas using two fingers, or as you saw there, I can tap and drag to move the guide. This is an oval-shaped guide here that I'm using. And this is great when you want to use create some figures with parallel lines or with regular shapes. You don't really, in this application, have the ability to draw shapes quite as easily. There are a number of other drawing features. This is one that's kind of fun to play with. That's a symmetry feature. It allows you to draw along a central axis. The oval feature allows you to draw basically circles and ovals. And the same with rectangles. So let's take a look at this app on an iPhone. And the big difference is, of course, it's a smaller screen. So when you click on, say, the pencil tool, it fills the entire screen. Same with the colors, which is a little annoying, of course, but you only need to do that occasionally. And there is a preset button down in the center bottom of your screen. Anyway, even the layers menu also takes up an awful lot of space. Most of the tools are hidden under what look like some drafting tools. These are the same tools we saw in the other version. So here I'm drawing with a guide, just dragging with one finger to move it, two fingers to rotate. You can double tap it with a finger also to kind of reset it. So the functionality is basically the same. You can squeeze two fingers together to narrow or make the drawing area larger or smaller. Anyway, and then like we saw before, you can draw different shapes, ready-made shapes, ovals, and whatnot. And you can click the paint bucket, and you can fill things with different colors. In fact, if you long press on a color in your drawing, that will kind of eyedropper the color up, which does save a little bit of time. So anyway, and you can put in text, and obviously your phone has whatever text entering options that you normally would have, so you could speak to text, or I have a swipe feature. Anyway, and text becomes an object in your drawing. Once you've created the text, you can't edit it anymore. So you can move it around using some of the editing tools. Flip it around, rotate it, create some fun effects. Again, this is a very simple program, not the full power of something like Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so let's actually start drawing a new sketch here for our project. And the big thing, one of many things, is that you can choose the size of the sheet of paper that you're using, your virtual sheet. 4,000 pixels is a nice number. It's a big number. It allows you to import pretty high resolution photographs. So obviously you can use some preset sizes, but what I like about that is it's always easier to reduce an image than it is to make it larger. So anyway, you can import a picture. It comes in on its own layer. And I make my background layer, the layer with the picture on it, a little grayed out just by double tapping or tapping on the layer. And then you click on another layer. I made a new one to draw on. It's just convenient that way if you mess up or you want to try a couple of options. Having a few layers is better than drawing on that background image. And let's see, maybe I'll do some kind of bird-like, gull-like thing for my bus stop here. I like the location in front of the gymnasium, and you can combine draw lines that are created kind of freehand, and also lines that are created using straight edges or the protractor. The big thing here is creating two views or using two views of your site to really study the design. And again, it's a sketch. It can be totally loose. Obviously, I can use my straight edge to help me align with the perspective, the vanishing points, or in this case, the slope of the hill. And anyway, that's basically it for creating a sketch. You now need to kind of export the image. And what I would recommend is turning off the background layer, the layer that has the image on it, just by tapping the little eyeball in the image lists. And you can also erase any stray lines, which you might not have seen when the image was present. Anyway, and then you just click the kind of home button, and you'll see the option for sharing. AirDrop obviously is most convenient if you're on an Apple device, but email works just fine, and that will send you a drawing with a white background that you can easily manipulate. So here we are in Illustrator, and we've got to do some modifications of our sketch just to gussy it up a little bit. And hopefully you're all vaguely familiar with the main part of the interface. One of the things that you can do if you want is match the size of your new Illustrator drawing with the size of the drawing that we created using SketchBook, whatever it was. I think it was 4,000 by 3,000 actually. And we can place the document that we created. I'll just go to File, Place, or Command-Shift-P. And let's see, I think I put it on my desktop here. There we go. And I believe you can just click to place the image. Or you can click and drag to expand it to whatever size that you prefer. So here's our image, and you might say, well, it's just a picture. There's not much we can do with it in Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator is a vector editing tool, so it's used to dealing with lines that are drawn kind of AutoCAD style, which have grips or handles on them. Well, we can convert this drawing more or less. We will lose certain elements, for example, some of the fades on the line types, but we can convert it more or less using some tools in Illustrator. The big thing is if you go to the window pull-down menu, you can call up a whole menu of tracing options. If I go here to Image Trace, that brings up a menu which allows you to basically take a picture and convert it to the vector style paths that are what make up an Illustrator drawing. And there are a number of presets based on the type of image that you have imported. So let's say you're importing a drawing that is, I don't know, like a pattern of a tile pattern or something like that. You can insert it using line art, sketched art, silhouette, any of these number of these things. If it's something like, say, a Tiffany window, you may use a high fidelity photo, or you may use something like 16 colors, which would simplify it, and then you can modify it afterwards. Anyway, I'm going to use sketched art. It gives me a warning that this could take a while, and I'll just click OK, and that wasn't so bad. What I want to do here, what I'm seeing now is the tracing result, which is a little hard to understand. If I show it tracing result with the outlines, this kind of bluish aqua color is the actual outline of what it's finding. Now, my drawing is pretty crisp. That's a good reason to use these electronic sketching tools. So you get a nice clean line. If it's a hand-drawn drawing, this boundary may be more irregular, in which case you can compensate by using some of these sliders here, accounting for more or less noise. So anyway, once you've got a tracing result that you like, just click this expand button. And what it will do is it will convert the kind of rough trace into editable pieces. So if I come here with my direct selection tool, I can now come in, and these are all pieces that I can modify using the tools of Adobe Illustrator. These are all anchor points. Okay, now you might say, well, all right, so what? A couple things you can do here with this object now that it's been converted. First of all the editing tools that are common to Illustrator are available. We could have rotated and scaled before, but I could use, for example, this free transform tool. And let me just grab it using the general, the selection tool, not the direct selection tool. And what it does is it gives me a number of options here. Let me just zoom in on that. Each of the icons is somewhat descriptive of what it does. This one is constrained or not. This one is a perspective distortion tool, and this one is a free distortion tool. So, for example, if I wanted to make it look like it was vanishing towards a vanishing point, I could use the free perspective tool to make it appear like it's kind of fading off into the distance. Maybe that's a little bit much. And the free distortion tool, the option for completely free distortion, this allows you to basically grab any of these grips. I don't think I like that because I like my vertical lines here. Anyway, so that's a really handy tool. Underneath this tool, by the way, let me just take a look at that. Yeah, lovely. Is one that I really like playing with. I don't know why. It's called the Puppet Warp tool. And what you do, we have to select the object first, click Puppet Warp. What it allows you to do is to click on a series of points that become kind of, I don't know, rotational points. And now if you click and drag on those points, you can kind of warp the object. So if I, for example, want this to appear like it's flying a little bit, I can rotate that endpoint. And again, you can add further points. And I love the kind of Voronoi pattern that it creates. I don't quite understand what it's doing there, but anyway, so you can really have some fun effects there. If I want to get some little twists on pieces. You can modify your sketch, without having to go back to the sketch. Another tool you might find interesting is this perspective grid tool here. It is an icon that looks, I don't know, like a little perspective grid. And what you can use this for, if you, say, have a drawing where you are trying to mimic an existing perspective, but there's certain elements you forgot to draw. What you can do, this grid here, let me just change it a little bit. You can actually draw on this grid. It's a little difficult sometimes to get it to match a photo exactly, but what's cool is you can click on different parts of the grid. This is the orange side, and this is the blue side here. When you click on that side, any object you draw will be drawn on the perspective grid. So if you have something that you absolutely want to try and match, spending some time fiddling around with that is awfully handy. Let me just close that and show you that now this object is part of the drawing, and it can be manipulated and moved. It's not locked onto that grid. But that's awfully nice if you have some lines or something that you wanted to fix that were in perspective. And obviously, when you use your drawing tools, various applications of the Shift button will force it into vertical alignment, or you can display under the View menu. You can force. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just use the Live Paint tool? Well, you can. What I like to do. There's a couple different ways you can do it, and I could just select this object and click the Live Paint tool and it will convert it. What I like to do is create a new layer for painted objects, and the reason is sometimes it's nice to control overlapping doing it this way. And if you go in your layer menu here, and I just call it up by clicking the stacked layers icon, I can create a new layer clicking the new layer button, which is down here at the bottom. And what it does is it creates a new layer. These layers are very similar to AutoCAD layers in that they have certain properties. and obviously you can name them. So I could name this like colors or something like that, and I can also drag them up and down in the list. And Photoshop and Illustrator both use these layers to kind of control visibility. So for example, if I drew that rectangle that I had earlier and fill it with some color, well, if I draw that and it's on the bottom layer, it shows up underneath this object. If I draw it and the layer is above it, it blocks out the object behind it. Okay. This is a really quick and easy way to control objects. So I like to make a layer with colors, and then what I do, I'll select this object here that I've drawn, find it in the layer list here, and when you have something selected, it indicates that you've actually selected it with this little blue dot. I can click the little piece here and duplicate it just by choosing duplicate from this flyout menu. So now I have a copy, and then I'll drag that down into the colors layer. So I now have two copies of the line work for this project. I have one that's here in the background in layer number 2, and then I have one over here that is in my line work layer. Again, you don't have to do it this way, but I find it's awfully handy. Anyway, this guy, when I select this guy and I go and dig out my live paint bucket, which hopefully you remember looks suspiciously like a paint bucket, it converts that object into what's called a live paint group. And in fact, you might be able to see, I can't get my cursor to read here. It says click to make a live paint group. When I click on this object, it should allow me to fill in different areas just by moving over them. You see how it finds these little spots here in between, because they are completely bounded. Above my cursor, you'll see the different paint colors, kind of a quick way to modify things. So I can create that, colors that way. Some shapes may or may not paint. I don't think this area is completely bounded for some reason. I'm not sure why it can't find it. But it will give you that little red highlight. So what if we want to fix up some of these colors, make them a little more interesting? Let me just zoom in on them a little bit. Command or Control plus zooms you in. Command or Control minus zooms you out. Well, first of all, I can select these individual pieces. Selection tool, or tap the V command to bring it up. It just selects whole objects. In this case, the object is a live paint group. But I can basically take these individual pieces, and by clicking the expand button, it will convert those parts into individual paths, which basically means I can now come in here and I can select these paths, oops, come on, and modify them kind of independently of the others. And in fact, if you look at our layer list here, let me drag, close that group, what you'll see is that now there are a number of different groups, but here are my three pieces that I can modify. And in fact, here, let me make a new layer, and I'll take these guys and I'll move them onto my new layer here. There we go. Just allows me a little bit greater control of these individual objects. Now, here they are. What I can do, I'm going to select them, and I'm going to copy them. And then use paste in place to put a copy right on top of the original. And what you'll see here, I can paint that copy. Now, most paint colors are opaque. However, Illustrator does have a number of different paint textures that you can use. Let me go here to the patterns, basic graphics, graphics textures, and these are really simple patterns that have what's called an alpha channel. Basically, they're black and white, and here I'll paint with one of these materials, and wherever it's white, this material is transparent, and that's really nice if you want to have, say, an overlap like this, where you've got this white shows the color through, and black shows the pattern. So this can be a really interesting effect here on my wing. Now, what if I want to use a slightly different strategy? I'm going to make a copy of this. What if I wanted those lines to be white? Well, it's a little tricky sometimes to do. So what can we do with this pasted in object here? We have a whole transparency menu here that we can call up. And you might say, well, gee, I know all about transparency. That's where we can control the opacity of these objects, right? In fact, there are quite a few more things that you can do in that menu. First of all, the biggest thing you can do is use this opacity mask. And what you can do with that, now right now I don't have anything in there, you could make parts of this drawing more or less opaque based on a selection area that you already have. And that will clip the object below. Now I don't want to clip it. What I want to do, I want to paste in place here a copy of this object. And what I'll do is I'm going to paint that object this same pattern that we used before. Except now, look what happens. Because it's opaque, it's an opacity mask, it sort of inverts the object below. So anywhere where the pattern is black, in this case, it blocks the object below. Now you might say, oh wow, that's great, now I have a pattern that's white. Well, you can also change the way it interacts with the part below. Patterns that are black and white don't often work with most of these. Patterns that have colors will start to do interesting things. But even some of the basic ones that you may have heard of, like multiply, can create some really interesting effects. So anyway, so there's basically two options for how to create patterns. And these patterns can look really nice on your object once you've created them. Again, it's just a matter of experimentation. By the way, when you're in the middle of a transparency mask, I think I'm still in the middle of it here, you have to click back on the main image to stop editing it, and now it's available for your normal editing tools. Well, another thing you can do to gussy up this drawing, make it a little more interesting, we can put some scale figures in here. There are a number of different ways of getting scale figures in. We could use the ArchVision library if you're working on one of the desktops, the PC desktops, and that works great. You can orient the scale figure and drag them right into the Illustrator interface. If obviously you prefer working on your laptop, there are other ways. I'm going to show you here. This is Photoshop. You can take scale figures here. This is just a silhouette. And you can paint them any color that you like, obviously think about what the background is going to be looking like, because when you bring in the figure to Illustrator, you won't be able to change the color. So anyway, paint it some color that you want, and then make sure that when you save it, save as, you can actually bring in Photoshop documents. I prefer, I don't know why, to use PNG. I guess the file sizes tend to be a little bit smaller. And let me just put that on my desktop here. The reason that I use PNG is because, and I'll just allow this to be higher file size, the background is transparent. You see how the background here is just a checkerboard pattern? That is Photoshop's way of telling you that there's nothing there. Okay, and that's really nice when you get to Illustrator here, and you place the document. I'll just place that in there. Well, first of all, if I was planning to do further editing, I could link it, and then that would allow me to make changes, and it would eventually update here. Anyway, once it's placed here in the document, you see how the white area or the clear area in the original document remains clear. If you use a JPEG, you won't get that alpha channel. So that's a nice feature, and of course I can scale this a little bit. I could also, if I really wanted to do further Illustrator effects, I could use the image trace and convert that guy. Now, what if I had a photorealistic person that I wanted to use, but it's a picture of whatever, something with a background? You can use, there is what's called the quick selection tool. It's kind of like the magic wand tool, except that you can drag it across an entire object here. Usually it does a pretty good job of getting most of the pieces. You know, if it doesn't get certain parts, you can come in and see if you can get like these little trailing bits here. Sometimes it's just not going to get it, or it'll get little extra pieces that you don't really want. What I will do sometimes here, I guess I'm missing part of his head. We don't want to give him a haircut. There we go. That's much better. Except I'm missing something over here, his back. Then I will select the inverse just by right-clicking on the object here and deleting it. Okay, and again, you see what we saw in the other drawing, where the background kind of becomes this checkerboard, which means that it is invisible. And then being sure to save as a person, and save it in a format which allows that alpha channel to shine through, which PNG is the easiest one. So anyway, I'll click Save, OK, and now when I go back to Illustrator and I place that document, hopefully the alpha channel will be happily embedded. Make him about the right size, and you can see that, excuse me, he is able to behave and interact with the drawing the way we're expecting. Okay, so those are adding scale figures. I also will probably want to place that background image. Let's see, which one did we use? I think I used this one, right? So place that in here. Hopefully I have enough space to get the whole image. And like we did before with other objects, make sure that you send it to... Now, of course, I haven't added in some other colors and things like that, and I do think that the opacity here is a little bit much for my rendering. I really don't want the background image to distract from my lovely bus stop. So anyway, and that really makes an interesting image. Now, a few last things that you could do. Some people don't like the sharp line quality, or they prefer more richer materials. There are some filters that you could apply to, say, soften the line weights. These are all under the Effect pull-down menu. There are some which are kind of what you might call vector-based. They are easy to remove. For example, I think drop shadow or something like that can look very nice. Again, depending on where it is. I don't think a drop shadow would work here. And then some are basically Photoshop effects. And you have to kind of experiment with it. But if I just want to soften the line work here a little bit, I can use this Gaussian blur, and sometimes that will give you just a little bit of a softening effect. That isn't really super pronounced. I could drag it up and let's see what we get. And there we go. So again, it may or may not be the look that you like, but what I like about these softening effects is you see how, first of all, there's an interesting contrast between the scale figure and the image. Kind of makes it look a little more hand-drawn. It contrasts with the sharpness of the scale figure here also, and with the background image. That is nice. I could also, try blurring the background image if I wanted, say, the opposite effect, sharp lines in front of the background. So, and if you decide that you don't like some of the Gaussian blurs or other things, you can come back in here and select the object and go to the Appearance menu. And it does have all the effects, which you can kind of undo or redo, depending on how you feel. And you can also double-click on it, and it will bring up the Gaussian blur menu. And that, of course, will allow you to make more subtle changes. So the last thing is adding some annotation to this drawing, and I think we sometimes forget that's actually part of our drawing composition. And there are a number of different tools and annotation styles. I'll just draw, say, a simple curve here. And these curves, that's not a very heavy line weight now, is it? We can make that a nice heavy line weight. You don't typically, that's not very heavy at all. There we go. You'll want to make it something which is not going to compete with other parts of your drawing. So obviously a much heavier line weight may be in competition with these drawings, but you don't want it so light that it doesn't show up. The other thing is, here I'll drag this end point, just double click on the anchor point here and drag it over to the drawing, is that the actual look of the drawing can be changed here. So make sure that you angle it so that it actually looks good on the drawing. And then if you are going on top of objects where the color is going to match, you see how this doesn't look very good. And especially if I select this object and I come in here and add an arrow, for example, and here let's add let's scroll down in this list and find a nice big blobby arrow. That actually might be a little bit too big. There we go. So there's a number of features that you can change, but that doesn't look very good because it's on top of a black black drawing. So and I don't feel like changing my drawing, so maybe changing the color of the stroke so that it's something more neutral, or even a color that is distant somehow from the other colors in the drawing. Again, depends on the depth of the image that you have in the background. I'm not sure the white would look nearly as good, but sometimes that looks really good. So that is how you can make some changes to the arrows. And again, I would be consistent, and then once you've got the arrow the way you like it, you can just use the selection tool and Alt drag it. And by holding down Shift, I can force these to be in a line. And remember, when your text is all in a line, it looks much neater. And then just use the Direct Selection tool. Direct Selection tool to grab that anchor point and drag it over to whatever part of the drawing I have. These Bezier handles can allow me to manipulate the curve so that it looks a little nicer, but I still maintain that nice alignment that I like. I'm not sure I like this guy standing in front of the line, although I don't know, it's kind of an interesting interaction with the annotation of the drawing. So anyway, that's how you can annotate your drawing.